You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Now, the problem of evil points to God's existence. Welcome back, my dear, gentle listeners. I'm joined once again by my very dear friend, Eric Robinson, for another duo podcast here on PolyPat's Paradigm. Eric, it's always a joy to sit down and chat with you about such wonderful things.
Yes.
Suffering and evil, maybe not so much that one, but you know what I'm saying, right?
And for those watching on either of our YouTube channels, either Polycarp's Paradigm or the Pat Flynn Show YouTube channel, I am wearing black in light of today's conversation about evil. So here we go.
That's right. You look like Bane, too. That's pretty sweet. Yeah.
You think darkness is your ally? I was born in it. Okay, never mind. We won't go there. We'll start talking about the problem of evil, how it's really a solution, how it actually points towards the existence of God. Right.
And I just want to set the stage with this with just a couple of I think important remarks. One is just to acknowledge the real force that the problem of evil has on our lives emotionally. I think that's really important. You know, before you start getting into the philosophical arguments, you don't want to overlook the tremendous, in many instances, absolute abject horror that is the suffering that people go through in life.
Yeah.
All of us. So, you know, philosophy can be very cold and abstract, and that's the nature of it. And I just want to preface the conversation with that is when we're trying to analyze something philosophically, we are trying to abstract from often the very harsh, concrete realities, because we're trying to just see as clearly as possible. And that may sometimes present a somewhat cold presentation. And I want to flag that and acknowledge that, because one, I don't want to make it seem like I myself am indifferent to suffering, either to other people's suffering, which weighs on me incredibly heavily, or even my own suffering. You know, we all have our own crosses and often tremendous suffering in life. So I just wanted to put that out there before we begin this conversation. I don't know if you want to add anything to that at all, Eric.
Yeah, I mean, one thought that comes to mind is that it's interesting how different people disagree on God's existence or what God is like, but it seems like everyone can acknowledge that there is suffering in the world. And I think that's so true. Like, if you go talk to anyone, I bet there's some sort of suffering happening in their life or in their immediate family or friends' lives, especially in the midst of a pandemic when a lot of people are suffering from the coronavirus or from mental illness or, you know, a host of problems that are brought about in the year 2020. And so I just acknowledge that as well, that like this is a emotionally hard topic, dealing with evil. And so I think we have to first, we acknowledge that, and that it is difficult. As someone who is Catholic, that often will see a crucifix of Jesus hanging on the cross, I find great solace and great comfort in that, knowing that my suffering can actually have meaning, that my suffering is not just wasted, that it can be united with Christ's suffering for the healing of the world. And that, to me, is one of the big solutions of evil. So you could say is that evil gets conquered through the cross. And so I think the gospel itself is the best medicine, the best way to not only endure suffering, but capitalize on it so that it can actually provide the necessary balm of healing that our world so desperately needs.
Right. Yeah, I think you're right. I think sometimes the problem of evil is divided into multiple categories. One is called the philosophical problem of evil, and that's what we're going to treat today. The other is called the emotional problem of evil, right? So one is in our head, the other one is in our gut or our hearts.
Yeah.
And I think only Christianity can solve both of those. I think only and it solves it in different ways. And I think what you're talking about, there's definitely some head work that happens there, but it's a lot of gut and heart work. Christ crucified on the cross. And yeah, I'm quite convinced of that only Christianity can solve both the philosophical and emotional problem of evil. Doesn't mean it still isn't difficult. Doesn't mean that there isn't still a ton of mystery around it. But we don't want to confuse mystery with problems or objections. I think this is another thing we want to delineate. So yeah, with those, I guess, prefatory remarks out of the way, we should dive in, shall we?
Yeah, and I would love to hear your take on this. You know, that you were an atheist. Was the problem of evil, was that a huge objection? And also just framing the objection to our listeners in such a way that, you know, makes it kind of hard to overcome. Let's say I would love to hear.
Yeah, we'll steal
how you frame it. Yeah.
Yeah. Was it a big thing for me? No, not as much as it is for other atheists. I mean, it was something I would have probably thrown out. But there's a number of atheists, formidable academic atheistic thinkers who do not push the problem of evil. So it's not something that all atheists accept or find especially impressive as an argument against the existence of God. I think it is the best argument against God's existence. I mean, it's certainly the most traditional one. It's the one that impacts the most number of people. And once you really go deep with it, it is, I think it is the best argument against God's existence. I don't think it ultimately succeeds for reasons we'll get into, but it's not the only one. I think people think that this is like the only argument against God's existence. You have in philosophy of religion, you have objections to like coherence objections to theism or stuff like that, and those can be, you have to work through some clever objections there. I think they can all be overcome. But yeah, at the end of the day, I think the problem of evil probably is something that has, at least it's had more lasting force with me personally than any other objection has. But it's interesting because it's something I've grappled with more and more after I've become a theist, and it was as much of a difficulty when I was an atheist. So I kind of have a weird relationship with it. And I guess it's maybe because once I become a theist, I am very much more interested in why God would allow evil, that I've wrestled with it more. So it takes on a different significance, and I wouldn't say it's as much of a problem for me, but I guess I've just been more interested in probing the mystery of it as a theist, if that makes sense. So yeah, there's different versions of the problem of evil. One, it's often divided into what's called the logical problem of evil or the evidential problem of evil. There's been any number of class. I mean, going all the way back to some like Epicurus. Greek philosophers who would pose the problem of evil. David Hume quotes him. David Hume is an advocate of the logical problem of evil, comes up through other thinkers like J.L. Mackie. And it's still presented today. I mean, there is something of an acknowledgement that the logical problem of evil has kind of been swept into the philosophical dustbin, that it has been kind of done away with. But it creeps up every now and then. And what it claims is that it is just... It really is a contradiction, right? That there's really a sort of straight out, irreconcilable difficulty between the existence of God and any evil or suffering in the world. So the sort of famous Epicurean paradox would say something like, because God is all powerful, he can create any world that he wants. Because God is all good, he would create a world without suffering and evil. But we live in a world with suffering and evil. So there's a problem here, right? Either God isn't all powerful or God isn't all good. And most people would just say that would be enough to just show you that God doesn't exist. Most people wouldn't want to say, okay, God exists, but he's incompetent, or he isn't all good, or something like that, right? So that would be something like the stronger form of the problem of evil. Now we'll come back to that, but that's known as the Epicurean paradox, and it's often formulated in different ways. Mackie formulates it in a slightly different way, but very similar in his Evil and Omnipotence paper, famous paper on that. And then there's also known as the evidential problem of evil. This is more of a probabilistic argument. We say, okay, well, maybe there isn't a strict, logical incompatibility between God and evil, but when we look at either types of evil or the sheer amount of evil, it just seems like it makes it just very improbable that an all good, wise and powerful God exists. So they move away from the kind of stronger argument to say, evidentially, this just puts such a significant weight in the scale for atheism. And then it's just kind of, I guess, kind of trying to weigh and measure different probabilities there. Does that make sense, Eric, how it's sometimes divided, the different arguments?
Yeah, that makes sense. Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay, so what do I want to say to these? There's a number of ways that I've approached it. So I'll come at it from a couple different angles. I'm working on a paper right now, which I hope to submit for publication soon. And I think it's an interesting argument because what I want to say is that atheists often find themselves in a position that is unsustainable. Because on the one hand, they want to escape arguments for the existence of God by appealing to things that are known as brute facts, that some things can just exist and they don't really need any explanation for why they exist. They're just there and that's all, as Bertrand Russell would say, in the universe. On the other hand, they want to say that evil cannot be adequately explained on theism, right? That it just doesn't find a satisfying explanation. So I charge in my paper that there's an inconsistency in atheists here, right? On one hand, they don't seem to have a problem with things not making sense, and on the other hand, they're demanding that everything needs to make sense. And what I argue in the paper, and we go into more detail in this episode, is you can't have it both ways. That in venturing the problem of evil, you're implicitly committed to what's known as the principle of sufficient reason. And if that's the case, then you should privilege the arguments for the existence of God. You should accept God's existence and relocate the problem of evil to a theological mystery, is the objection that I pose there. Mm-hmm. But let's hold off on that. We can come back to that one later. I think that's of course I'm going to say it's interesting because I'm writing a paper on it, right? But I think we can come at a more general approach right now and think about the idea of a moral standard. This is an often classic response to the problem of evil, but I like the way my friend Josh Rasmussen comes about this. And I'll give a brief sketch, Eric, and then you can ask, can kind of jam on it. And the idea is something like this, right? When we say that evil exists and that suffering exists, we are committed to the idea that it's not just that we don't like it, right? But something is wrong. Something is really wrong here, that something is bad, that something is the way that it ought not to be. So when we pose the problem of evil, the problem of suffering, we are committed, even if only implicitly, to some type of moral standard, right? To some objective good, if you will, that we can legitimately say that things, in some sense, have failed to meet our expectations, right? That's what we mean. That there's some rule or some measure. And if we don't say that, and we just reduce everything to preference, then we lose the problem of evil. Right, then it just doesn't get off the ground, right? So for the problem of evil to have any force, to say that things really are bad, like objectively bad, then we're going to be committed to some type of moral standard, right? Now, some people at this point would say that a moral standard is impossible without God, who is subsistent goodness itself existing. That's that, and I actually think that that's right. But I don't think we need to make that strong of an argument. We can actually just say that a moral standard is far less probable without the existence of God. And it's not just a moral standard that we need to consider, right? It's a moral standard, but it's also the emergence of moral communities who are capable of rational reflection on the moral standard, who can then formulate things like the problem of evil, right?
Wow.
And then we can ask, what worldview is something like that more probable on, right? Well, on classical theism, a moral standard is guaranteed because the view of classical theism that God just is subsistent goodness itself. So it's not even like arbitrary divine command ethics, right? There's nothing that God looks to that is higher than himself. God just is the good, as Plato would have it. Like he just is the rule, is subsistent goodness himself. So we have a guaranteed moral standard on classical theism. And I think we can also admit and see, by the light of reason, that God would probably see the value in bringing about moral communities, beings, free, moral agents that can reflect on the moral standard and conform their lives to it. That is a very traditional commitment of certainly not just theism, but Christianity as well. And that's exactly what we see, right? That's what we see. I would argue that's what we see, right? That we have a moral standard and we have moral communities. Now, contrast that with atheistic worldviews. Is that at all as probable? And I want to say, if it's not impossible, it's at least far, 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 far less probable, right? And this is why many atheists are nihilists, right? Because they depending on what brand of atheism you take, if you take a physicalism or materialism, it's hard to see how, if morality at bottom is fundamentally amoral, whether it's particles or physical symbols, how you could ever add any of that stuff up to get this moral standard that we're looking for. It just seems like a theoretical or conceptual impossibility, let alone how that could add up and result on any sort of binding force on moral communities, let alone how you would even get moral communities themselves, right? So we can already just see, I think, just from a broad, reasoned perspective, that the probabilities of having moral standards, a moral standard that's binding on moral communities that are capable of rational reflection, is just so, if it's not impossible, it's at least so far less improbable on atheism, that any experience, any moral experience at all, including the experience of evil, automatically counts towards the theistic hypothesis, because that worldview better predicts it. It better explains it. So that's where I would say that evil, while it may superficially point away from the existence of God, upon deeper analysis confirms the existence of God when we compare these competing worldviews and what would be reasonable probabilities of which one is more likely to give us moral standards of moral communities and which one isn't.
Now, would the atheist maybe say something when it comes to suffering? Well, we see in the animal world, let's say, like the animals do suffer, but this is all part of the evolutionary process. The what is it called? The survival of the fittest, right? Mm-hmm. And so, yes, there's suffering, but we wouldn't call it like evil. It's just like a form of like suffering, I guess you could say.
Right. Yeah.
So different.
So let's take that, because that's a good example, right? Okay, but are you using that as an argument against the existence of God? And if they say yes, you have to say why. And the only thing that they could say is because that doesn't seem right. That seems bad or wrong. You following me? Right?
Yeah, so that's where we get into, we're not just stating like the way things are. We're actually now asking why.
It's not just a fact. They feel like there's something wrong about that, something bad. And if they say it's just a fact,
they object.
Right, and if they say it's just a fact and there's nothing wrong with it, then what's the problem?
Yeah, okay, so that's they would be committed to saying, well, it is just a fact, and so, yeah, this doesn't count against theism, but it also doesn't count against atheism.
Right,
so
but then they lose the problem of evil. That's exactly what I'm saying, right?
Yes, exactly.
So it's and you could do that if you want to say, oh, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Okay, but then what's the objection, right? But it's when you make the claim that this is wrong, this is bad, and that's why I don't think an all loving good God would do this. That's when you're committed to what I've said is this idea of a moral standard and moral communities, and that's exactly when it tips the scales back in favor of theism on that deeper analysis.
Yes, and one thing that I've heard Trent Horn say before is, we have our five senses. We can see, taste, touch, smell, and all of that. But we also have another sense. We have the moral sense. I think everyone listening on the show, whether you're an atheist, a Catholic, Protestant, non-religious, religious, spiritual, whatever you might identify as, that you would all agree that rape is wrong. Like, murder is wrong. Like, you would just agree to that. And in fact, it was interesting this summer, Pat, when the riots were happening and everyone was posting on Facebook about how evil systemic racism is, which I agree that racism is evil. Like, that's an evil thing. But what it dawned on me is like, wow, look at how our relativistic culture isn't so relative anymore. Like, everyone agrees that there is something evil. Well, that's a positive thing, at least, that like people are agreeing that something is wrong, that something's evil. Therefore, we can't just all say, you do you. Hey, if you're a racist out there, you do you.
Right.
You know, and so, and I was thinking about this before this episode, before we started recording, is like how really what you were saying is that the problem of evil, or the existence of evil, that we all recognize that there is evil in the world, that there's some lack of good, shows that there has to be an ultimate good, like a standard, like what you were saying, that we're comparing against. That we recognize that there has to be some sort of source of goodness, or some sort of source of this morality, to even say that something went off. For instance, with the racism thing, we have to say that there has to be a goal of non-racism, a goal of equality, that's the good, equality, and we see a dysfunction of it. And so if there is no goal, if there is no equality that we have to strive towards, then we can't even recognize the evil of racism. But we all do recognize it.
Well, there's a teleology there, right? Like there's something missing in a judgment of thinking that somebody is worth less than you, that should be there. Right, that's a false judgment. You're failing to see something that you should be seeing, in a sense. But we can come back to that, because I want to circle back to the moral standard thing, and I want to say that I would not expect evil if atheism was true. Right, that's really what I'm saying here. Because if
you expect the natural inclination to say that something's wrong, you may expect suffering, but you may not expect that.
I don't even know if I would get that far. I mean, I so think atheism is such an unsalvageable worldview. I mean, I think it's metaphysically necessary that God exists. So it's kind of even hard to countenance what I would expect on atheism. But if atheism were true, if physicalism were true, I wouldn't expect a moral standard. I wouldn't expect moral communities. Certainly, I wouldn't expect conscious beings, right? Oh, like evil is contingent upon so many things that I think only a theistic worldview can explain, like rationality, like a moral standard, like consciousness, for example, like a contingent order, right? Yeah, free will. These are things that I think only a theistic worldview can explain. I think people don't understand how evil is contingent upon these things. Like it hangs upon these other things that themselves are in need of an explanation, that are only, I think, ultimately explained by theism, and are things that we could predict on the theistic worldview. But I would not predict these on an atheistic worldview. I would not predict moral communities. I would not predict a moral standard. Therefore, I wouldn't expect evil on an atheistic worldview, because all those things that would even make it possible for me to have a judgment that something is bad or wrong, I don't think would be there on an atheistic worldview. And that's why I'm saying that evil itself, even if it superficially seems to be against the existence of God, on its deeper and most proper analysis, actually points to God's existence.
Exactly.
Does that make sense?
So you can like reverse the Epicurean objection and basically say like the objection would be like, there is no God, and if there is no God, there would be no moral standard, there'd be no evil. But there are moral standards and there is evil, therefore there is a God.
Right, yeah, and that's
something like that.
That's kind of a traditional way of looking at it. Like if God did not exist, then a moral standard wouldn't exist. But a moral standard does exist, and therefore God exists, or something like that. And you can just kind of swap in, like if God does not exist, evil would not exist. If you want to be more provocative about it, and I kind of want to be careful with some of those formulations. That's why I like to do the more modest one, the more probabilistic one, because then we just have less to defend, and I think that's all we need. Yeah. Right. That's all we need. And if we can just, because look, frankly, I think the stronger versions are true, but I think we can just work with what worldview would we more likely expect, a moral standard and moral communities. I think that's all we need. Of course, the kind of hidden premise, if you will, on the problem of evil is that God, doesn't or couldn't have morally sufficient reasons for allowing a world of suffering and evil. That's the thing that's kind of being smuggled in to the Epicurean paradox. And it is important, I guess dialectically, or if, in conversation, that if you're the skeptic and you're proposing that, the burden of proof is on you. It's on you to show that, right? Now, we might be curious of theists of what specifically those morally sufficient reasons are, but we're not under the obligation to show what they are to refute the problem of evil. It's the atheist who has to show that there can't be any morally sufficient reasons. And as many Christian philosophers pointed out, that is a burden of proof that has never been sustained and cannot be sustained, because you'd really have to be God. You'd have to be omniscient to be able to rule out the possibility that God has morally sufficient reasons for really why a perfect being would create an imperfect world. And in one sense, that's kind of what we would expect when you do good natural theology, is because only God is perfect. Only God can be perfect as subsistent being itself. Everything else that God creates, I mean, even think of free creatures, right? We're free creatures, but we're fallibly free creatures. And we're necessarily fallibly free creatures because only God is his own rule. Only God is subsistent goodness itself, right? So only God can be impeccable, right? Truly impeccable. It doesn't even make sense to say that God could create an infallible free creature. Now, maybe he can give those creatures so much grace and extra help to infallibly guide them. But it does seem right to me that it's just a metaphysical necessity that if God is going to create any free creature, that free creature is never going to be its own rule. It's going to have to always look to a rule above itself.
Yes.
And in that sense, it could always not look to the rule.
Mm-hmm.
And it could always fail. It could always fall away. And that is an important and deep consideration. And that actually ties deeply into a lot of work and thinking I've been doing on predestination and stuff like that. I think it. Mm-hmm.
And that's where we get the fall of the angels, like Lucifer and the demons and everything, which I think this is an interesting thing. And if I'm going on a tangent, we can bring it back. But I was just thinking how a lot of, I don't know, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like there is a lot of evidence that demons are real, that Satan is real. And we see this manifest in our society as far as we know that there are Satanists out there, there are witches out there, there are very
strong
evil seances
for
and evil things that happen.
Yep.
There are
exorcisms.
There's, and it's like not little evidence for this. It's like a lot. In fact, last year around this time in Houston, there was the first ever public black mass.
Yeah, that was
well.
sick.
What do you do with that as an atheist? What do you think about that? Like, oh, are they? Why would they do that? They obviously hate God. There's just such a spite towards God, or just such a there is like not just evil and like the physical suffering that we see, but there are like evil spirits that we see, or that we don't see, rather. But I think the recognition of that and the evidence of these exorcisms and like, I don't know, what would you do with that? And if they exist, then surely there's the good kinds of angels that exist. And then with all of that, where did any of these things come from anyway?
Right. Yeah. So a couple things about angels. I think they're actually very important because you said physical evils, but it has been in the tradition and certainly a line of thought, and I'm sympathetic to it. If you're a hardcore skeptic, your mileage will vary on this, but I think you need to seriously countenance it if you are a theist, that some of the physical evils, there's no reason to not think that those could be attributed to immaterial beings wreaking havoc on creation, right? I don't think you need that to answer the problem of physical evils. I think you just can understand that in a material world, the flourishing of one physical being will often result in the diminishment of another physical being. The cow eats grass. As the lion increases in goodness, the antelope decreases, and I really don't think that that's much of a difficulty. But for the angels and beings, yeah, I mean, it's sort of like how chemists, the history of chemistry, there's this sort of elegance to the nature of things that have caused people to posit entities where there are certain holes or gaps where it seems entities should be, like an element in an incomplete periodic table, and then it turns out, oh, they were right, and they get the empirical confirmation of that. Well, same thing on the great chain of being ontologically. We sort of, we can argue, I think, definitively and deductively to God's existence as the supreme first cause. There's obviously all these sort of low material beings, just the kind of brute physical matter coming up, amoebas coming up through animals, and then of course us, which is this kind of very fascinating mix of the material and the immaterial. And it seems like there's a gap missing between us and God, right? And that's where the angels are, right? So it seems like the angels just fill and people have made very strong arguments about this, like that we need angels there, right? Or else we're missing an obvious gap in the great chain of being. And I'm very sympathetic to that. So I think that there is something of a philosophical argument like that we can give for angels. But then, of course, we know that it's been revealed as well. So if we have already good reason to believe that Christianity and Catholicism is true, this hands us just further affirmation and specific content around that, especially around the fall of these beings. And we know that God has the angels play an important role in the governance of his creation. So it's not unreasonable to assume that the ones that fell away could be in some degree and possibly some very large extent responsible for a lot of the suffering and evil we see in the world, even just the physical, natural stuff. I don't think you can reasonably just wave your hands at that. Again, it's kind of beyond our sight, but you can. Again, I don't think it's necessary to battle against the problem of evil, but I think if we're trying to be honest about it and trying to make sense of everything, I think we need to include that what seems very probable reality of angels and demons into our general account. Of all this.
And one thing that, I mean, I've said this before, I believe on this podcast, but I guess one question I have for atheists is, okay, in your own personal life, you recognize that there are people, let's say you go to work and you have a lot of different colleagues of different types. You can recognize if your boss is a very prideful man or woman or very humble. So where does that come from? Like, to me, that just shows that, okay, you agree that pride exists. That, like, there's some immaterial reality to a human being to where you recognize pride when you see it, even though you can't see it, right? It's immaterial. It's this immaterial reality. And so what do you do with that as an atheist if you're especially dedicated to physicalism or naturalism? It's like, well, if that's just chemical reactions, then you have no you would have no reason to say that that is bad, or you wouldn't even really recognize it as such. But pride does exist. Therefore, there's an immaterial reality. And where does that come from? And so it's kind of going back to the moral good and moral evil that we judge to be right and wrong, and where we can perceive these things that are bad. So like pride, for instance, is such a big thing to, like, as far as like a red flag for atheism to me, because it's like that is an objective immaterial reality that we all recognize. We know when there's pride and we know when there's humility, and those can't be tested by a microscope.
There's a couple ways we can think about this, right? So we have God as a sort of general, supreme, ultimate standard of subsistent goodness itself, but we also have teleology, and I think that's kind of what you're hinting at. And there is a certain natural inclination. Good is a functional concept, as we call it in traditional natural law, right? That this is where things can fail to meet our certain expectations of its exemplar, right? If we know what a good human is, right? At least generally. And we know that somebody who's extremely prideful and hateful is failing to meet those expectations in the same way that like a sock with a bunch of holes in it is failing to meet our expectations of what a good sock is. Now, a sock is different. It's an artifact. We make it. We kind of impose value on it. But it's just a good illustration just to get the idea across. Or that a tree that doesn't sink, good deep roots and assimilate nutrients well is failing to be a good tree. It's failing to meet the expectations of what the nature of treeness is inherently striving towards. Now, I think teleology gives us a good grounding for morality, and people use the term value. Value is a slippery term. I like the classical terms of the good, right? Goodness, flourishing, thriving. And then morality comes online with beings that are capable of reasoning, rational agency, intellect and will specifically, where we can reflect on things like human nature and see what is perfective of it, right? What really causes us to flourish as the kinds of beings that, and here's importantly, what God has designed us to be. So I would argue that teleology, essentialism and teleology, which you need for the specific content of human morality, can only and ultimately be explained by theism, right? A divine mind, a divine organizing mind, right, is the only thing that can ground that. So theism offers an extremely robust account of everything that we need and want to affirm our moral experience. And you're just not going to get that on atheism. I think even if you try to be like an atheistic, an Aristotelian, that's going to collapse. It's not going to be sustainable without the theistic underpinnings or support. Or same thing if you're a sort of atheistic Platonist. All those to me are just theism light anyways. At that point, if you're at that point, it's just like, come on, just affirm classical theism. Because you've essentially conceded everything that made, I think, a lot of the atheistic project interesting in the first place, which is trying to reduce it to a sort of mechanistic, materialist, physicalist viewpoint. So that's why I call those views just theism light in some respect. So yeah, since you just kind of brought up the idea of pride or these vices, and right, vices are just are bad habits, right? Habits or dispositions that tend us away from what will cause us to objectively flourish given human nature. And virtues are the good habits, right? It's those the dispositions that tend us towards our true flourishing, our true thriving. And you're right, Eric, in that everybody's experience, we all really kind of live this way, right? We may have specific disagreements here or there, but every day on the streets, we are committed to the moral world. And you said it's interesting to see that our world is no longer relativist. I would say it never was, right? It was superficially relativist, but nobody ever lives consistently as a relativist. Even if you get to this point where you're saying, man, you just do you, don't judge other people, you're still not a relativist, because you're still saying like judging other people is wrong, like objectively wrong. Yeah. So there's just, like at most it's just a superficial, I think, bad way of looking at the world morally. But like we've never really been truly relativists. We're just confused deeply on, I think, the actual moral content that's relevant to the contemporary discussion, if that makes sense.
Yes. So in what ways, now that we've kind of outlined some things, and maybe there's some more things to outline here with this problem or solution of evil, basically, like, what are some other ways that the presence of evil, that it seems like every human being recognizes that there is some evil in the world? We may disagree on sometimes what that is, but most of the time there's a consensus. Everyone, like I said, agrees that rape is wrong, that murder is wrong. Like everyone just agrees about that. Mm-hmm. So how does that, once again, not just point to God, but let's say, how does it even point to the gospel of Jesus Christ?
Right. Yeah. So a few more distinctions.
Yes.
What I've offered so far is what might be just be called kind of a defense. Mm-hmm. There's a difference between a defense and a theodicy. A defense looks at the challenges of theism, like the problem of evil, and it says, here's why this argument is wrong, and that's it. It really just kind of diffuses the objection. But it doesn't try to answer every question. That's important, right? So if you're feeling like, okay, it sounds like I've taken the wind out of the sails of maybe the general Epicurean paradox, but I'm still somewhat dissatisfied with all the suffering and evil, I would say success, actually, right? That's okay. All a defense is meant to do, is just kind of take the wind out of the sails of the objection. It's not meant to answer all the questions and really probe the mystery. That's where something like a theodicy comes in. A theodicy is more of a theological exploration that really just tries to get some specific content on the question of, well, why does God allow suffering and evil into the world? And this, of course, is itself a very important project, and it's one that I've been heavily engaged in myself, especially as we all want to know, right? We all want answers to our difficulties in life. It'd be, I think, insincere to suggest that we don't want to know. Certainly, I've always wanted to know. And for me, a big thing I've been focusing on and researching right about lately is predestination. So it focuses a lot on that. And the world is your oyster as far as theodicies go. I mean, where do you want to start? There's so many out there.
Well, I think one interesting place that when we were talking about angels, maybe think of is, a lot of scholars believe that Job was the first book written of Scripture. And Job tackles this head on, like the problem of evil and suffering for someone who is a righteous man, Job. And we see from the reader's perspective of the scriptures that actually there was this scene in heaven that was happening that Job had no idea about between Satan and God, and Satan basically challenging God, like, he's only righteous. He only likes you, God, because you've made everything easy for him. But let me torture him a bit, and let's see how righteous he really is. Let's see if he blasphemes you. So literally everything gets stripped away from Job. His children die. His work is just completely abolished. His house falls apart. Like,
animals are killed.
He's taken all of his possessions, pretty much his whole family, except for his wife, which ends up being like a thorn in his side during the book. And so literally everything collapses, and God just told Satan, you can do anything you want to him, just don't kill him, basically. So even his health diminishes. He gets boils on his skin, and he's just wanting to provoke Job to curse God. And even Job's wife says, just curse God and die, basically. Like, and so even his friends are like, what did you do? Because surely you must have sinned. And he's like, no, like I haven't done anything. And he says, naked I came into the world, naked I leave. Still, blessed be the name of the Lord. That's Job's response to this suffering, which is amazing. But even Job, towards the end, he's like despairing of his own life. Like, why was I ever born and all of this? And then God shows up at the end of Job, just saying, like, Job, I know this is a mystery to you. You know, where were you when I created this? Where were you when I created that? At the end of the day, like, I'm God, and there is something going on here that's way beyond you to even know. But I have this under control, basically. And then Job blesses God and is like, okay, I surrender to the mystery of who you are. And then God ends up blessing Job with double of everything at the end. But except for the children, right? Yes, the children, yeah. I mean,
and why is that? Because he still has his children in heaven, right? And so there's a slight indication of the afterlife in the Old Testament there, right? So he gets double of everything as he had before, except for the children. Why is that? Because the children were never fully lost. Yes, I think sometimes people miss that. A lot to say on Job. Let me borrow from Eleanor Stump here, because I think Job is a perfect place to start. In her book, Wandering of Darkness, she unpacks this. Also important, when God offers reprimands, he reprimands Job's friends and colleagues that were accusing him of sinning. Yes, right? Exactly. And he says, no, Job didn't do anything wrong. Right. It wasn't about Job doing anything wrong. Yeah. And you guys are wrong. So that is real. So what does that mean? It means that suffering in a paradoxical way can actually be a blessing. And this is what's going to blow people's minds, and it blows my mind as well. And I think it transforms and redeems suffering in a way that can be beautiful, magnificent. I'm going to give a condensed and inadequate account of Eleanor Stump's take on Job in her book, Wandering in Darkness, which I think is beautiful. One is she talks about the fractal nature of suffering, how God can make people both ends and means. Ends and means. And so people sometimes overlook Satan, and they think that God is just taking a bet from Satan. But what Stump wants to say is, no, God is actually showing a special care to Satan here. And he's trying to show Satan not to be so cynical of his goodness, right? He's trying to break Satan down. Now, some people might say that Satan was irretrievably lost and that it doesn't matter and God shouldn't have done this, but we don't know, right? Exactly. It's just so far removed from us. But Stump wants to say that God can allow suffering and evil, and will allow suffering and evil if and only if it is the best or only available means to deliver some outweighing benefit primarily to the sufferer. That was a mouthful. Let me say it again. God will allow suffering and evil if and only if it is the best or only available means to deliver some outweighing benefit primarily to the sufferer. So he might have allowed... That doesn't mean he causes evil or that he produces it. It's just he allows permission, permits it. Permission. He doesn't do evil that good may come. He permits evil that good may come. Satan is separated from God, and he may well be eternally separated from God, but who knows? Maybe God did certain things that ensured that Satan wouldn't have gone even farther from him, right? And that's something to think about. That's something to think about. And that's kind of what Stump hints at in this Job. Now, however, so God's showing a special care and love to Satan by trying to break down Satan's cynicism. However, he also shows a special care and love to Job. So here's the fractal nature of suffering, where Job can be a means to Satan's end, and Satan can be a means to Job's end, and vice versa, right? So they're both means, but they're both ends in and of themselves. Now, what does Job want? And he wants to be a righteous man. He wants to be a righteous man. And God cares about what we care about because we care about it. This is in the Psalms, right? God wants to give us the desires of our heart. So Stump talks about the subjective and objective poles of flourishing. There's our kind of personal desires of our heart, like our love for our children, right? But there's also the objective flourishing of the beatific vision and life in God. God cares about what we care about because he's God, right? He does. He cares about the desires of our heart. He wants to give it to him. So Job wants to be a righteous man, and he was. But God could have seen and did see that Job could be the most glorious and righteous man of pretty much all the Old Testament. But how? By allowing Job to suffer, right? Such that at the end of the day, maybe if God didn't allow the suffering of Job that Satan wanted to impose, he would have been, as righteous as he was, but he would have been largely forgotten. But now we look at Job as the model and the exemplar of righteousness and perseverance. He has attained a glory that it's hard to see would have even been possible if God didn't permit the suffering that he had. And it was what Job wanted all along, right? It was the desire of Job's heart to be a truly righteous man and especially pleasing to God, which is a beautiful thing. And he suffered. He suffered immensely, but he got it, right? He got it. So there we can see where there's kind of two things there, where suffering could have been used as medicinal purposes for Satan, somebody who's really sick to either, maybe not in Satan's case, but in other cases to bring somebody back to God or to the point of justification of freely accepting God's grace, or at least not further away from God, right, into an even sicker condition. Or suffering can be used for somebody who's already enlisted in faith, right? And this is the idea where once we're already people of faith, it's kind of like signing up for the army. It's like, all right, God, you give me what you need to give me to make me the most holy man now. Where suffering can be a special blessing, a special love to help us attain a certain level of holiness and glory that if we could see it, we would say, that's worth it, God. I'll take that exchange. And that's the way that Stump approaches the commentary on the book of Job and Wandering Darkness. And like I said, I've done a horribly inadequate account of it. It's so beautiful that I would just encourage that everybody goes and reads that. Mm-hmm.
And even more worse than Job's suffering was Christ's suffering on the cross and the glory he received in being the firstborn of the dead, raised from the dead, and gives us hope, right? That whatever suffering, whatever we, in order to be glorified with him, it says in Romans, we have to suffer with him. And Paul says in Philippians that it has been granted to you that for the sake of Christ, you should not only believe in him, but also suffer for his sake. It is a privilege now to suffer with and for Christ. And that's how the gospel, I think, is so revolutionary about this topic of evil and suffering, is that it really only makes sense in light of the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, that every ounce, every little bit of suffering will not be wasted because it can be offered in union with Christ on the cross and then produce an all the more glorious resurrection reality at the end of time. And even in our own lives, we experience this. And there's something about when you were talking about Job that maybe as a man, it was just like, you want to go through the fire sometimes. It's like you want to go through the training for that marathon. You want to go through those hardcore things in life. You want to be tested in a way so you can know, like, I've been refined by the fire, and I not only survived, but now I'm like way better of a person than I was before that happened. Mm-hmm. And if we can grasp a little taste of this being in our 30s, Pat, then how much more would someone who, like a saint who's 1,000 years old now in heaven, they're probably grasping a lot more. And of course they have the beatific vision. So that's obviously great. But I'm just saying, like, if we can grasp this in our 30s, and a 90-year-old is grasping it even more if they've grown in wisdom and holiness, then God, who is ageless, who is infinite, obviously, like, there's wisdom there that surpasses our understanding, but even we can grasp a little hint of how these things can all make sense. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's beautiful. And to me, we always look to Christ crucified. It's like, we don't know why all these things happen sometimes, but what we do know is that God became man and suffered for us. Like, he didn't just ignore it. He actually redeems it. and it's for our good, and love is the thing that makes sense of everything. So love, in light of the world that we have, love gets even more manifested through suffering. Like Maximilian Kolbe voluntarily willing to say, I'm going to suffer an excruciating death by not being fed food in Auschwitz because I want this man to go free who he didn't even know because he had a family. And he's willing to suffer and die for that man who he didn't even know. And it's all out of love. We look to the martyrs, we look to the saints, and we see a great counterbalance to the evil. We see them embracing the suffering out of love. And that, to me, is the solution of all of it, and which makes sense because God himself is love. So when we suffer out of love, we're already in union with God, which is our glory.
Amen, brother.
Great. Well, we figured it out, Pat.
Done. And I just want to say, this is just the beginning of a conversation. This is something that I would encourage people to go read much more deeply about. Eric, I know you have other podcasts. I've got tons of podcasts on this subject. I take suffering very seriously on both philosophical and emotional levels. So, I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Pat, and thank you so much for your thoughts, and thank you, listeners, for listening. Hopefully we gave you some good food for thought and how the problem of evil is really more of a problem for atheists. And really, there's a great solution to evil, namely Christ crucified. And really, this whole reality points towards the goodness of God and how we're all called to become saints ourselves, become holy, so that we can radiate that goodness to the ends of the earth. God bless.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.